Hey, Sector's here. So I've reviewed the first two Joytime albums, so here I am going to review the third Joytime album from Marshmello, Joytime III. This one came out in 2019, just a year after Joytime II, which was a massive disappointment. So only a year between Joytime 2 and 3, compared to the 2.5 years between Joytime and Joytime 2, makes it seem like Marshmello kind of wanted to bounce back from how bad Joytime 2 was. Joytime 3 features 8 collaborations compared to like the 0 from Joytime 2, and I feel like this might have been done to keep the album a little more interesting. But do the amount of collaborations on this album and the extended track list of 13 songs, 4 more than Joytime 2's track list, help this album become better and a all-around good project? Well, sort of. The album starts off with Down, which is just a basic Joytime style track. It has that sound to it, but it just feels like it's missing something. I don't know, there's something about this track that does make it seem a little more annoying compared to the other Joytime tracks, but that might just be me. Run It Up is the next track on the album, and it's pretty decent actually. It features a pretty good vocal performance from Mello, albeit quite repetitive. The vocals are actually backed up by some nice guitars, and the drop has the classic Joytime sound to it. Not much to say, but it's pretty solid. Put Yo Hands Up with Slushy is one of the tracks that has a good balance between Mello and the collaborator. You can tell Mello did the melodic sections of this track, while Slushy did the more heavy dubstep drops. But Slushy's dubstep is one of his weaker styles in the general, I feel like, or at least definitely in the Monster Cat community. People rag on it all the time. So I find some of Slushy's heavier tracks to actually be really good. But unfortunately, this is not one of those. The basses here in the drop sound almost amateurish, but it serves its purpose. I think it does kind of go, but it sounds like they could have just done so much better. Let's Get Down with Ultron is a pretty conflicting track for me. I actually kind of like the first drop, but it's extremely empty, and the sidechain is a little bit much. It takes out too much of the vocal, I think. The track takes a turn for the worse with the second drop. It takes away the vocals from the first drop and just makes the side bass like a little more distorted, grittier. But that just makes the drop even more empty when the first drop being empty was already one of my complaints. It then introduces these unpleasant, harsh noises, which I assume Yultron contributed. It just doesn't seem good. Sad Songs features another good mellow vocal performance, and it features some nice guitar, like Run It Up did. I see the songs as actually quite similar, and both are pretty solid, but not much to say about either, honestly. Set Me Free with Bellacore is one of the tracks where it doesn't seem like Mello really did anything besides put his name on it. It's a boring bass house track with some sound choices I just don't agree with. Nothing here screams Mello to me, and I feel like Bellacore did most of the track, and even at that, it's still not very enjoyable. Room to Fall is absolutely one of my favorite tracks on this album. Elohim delivers a great vocal performance, and the rest of the track is great. The Flux Pavilion basses and the drops are pretty good, and it really adds character to the track, I feel. The only minor complaint I have is that I wish there was just some more high end on the chords in the drops, because it just feels like it's a little lacking. Ankling Life with Wiwek is easily the worst track on this album, and another one where it doesn't feel like Mello did anything besides slap his name on it. I don't like the vocal samples here, and I just can't get into the drops either. Wiwek is definitely an artist that I'm not a huge fan of. I've never really been able to get into their music, so I wasn't really surprised I didn't like this. Earthquake with Tynan is a pretty good track, although it's definitely not one of Tynan's more creative tracks at all. Far from it. I enjoyed the drops here, but they just sound a little bit too wet, in all honesty. I think they should have been a little grittier, but for what it is, it's a pretty good track. Falling to Pieces with Crankdat is easily my favorite track on this album. There's a great mix here between Mello's melodic production and Crankdat's heavier production. You can tell who did what, but it doesn't sound disconnected whatsoever. Mello delivers a solid vocal performance here, like most tracks he's on, and Crankdat backs it up with some pretty good drops. And the melody here is also just really great, too. All around wonderful track. Here We Go Again is a track that I find pretty similar to Down in the sense that they're both the Joytime style, but they just don't really do anything. Neither of them have the mellow vocal performance to elevate them a little bit, like Run It Up or Sad Songs. There isn't really much to say about this one, except I don't really like the lead here. Rescue Me with A Day to Remember is honestly one of the better tracks on this album, but it had potential to be better, I feel. Everything A Day to Remember contributes here, the vocals and instrumentation, are absolutely great. But I feel like the drops Mello delivered here were a bit of a letdown. They have that same simple plucky melody that he did with Happier, with Bastille, and Here With Me with Churches, which is a little tiring at this point. However, the production here is noticeably well done, and it's all around a good track. I just wish Mello would have maybe switched it up a little bit, because it sounds more unique than those two tracks I mentioned, because it has that instrumentation from A Day to Remember. I feel like the track really could have been something much better and more unique, but Mello really just went with his standard approach on this one. Proud is a good track with a pretty good message, but it is let down a bit by its production. Mello, once again, has a good vocal performance, which I usually say about most of his tracks. The drop seems a little rushed and not fully developed. It just feels a little flat, which really undermines like the message that Mello's trying to deliver here. But overall, it's a solid track and also a solid album closer. Overall, Joytime III is a pretty decent album. It's definitely a step in the right direction from Joytime II, but I also think it's more flawed than the original Joytime. It has some bad tracks, some decent tracks, and some great tracks, so it's got a little bit of everything. An issue I have with the album is that it has the clear style to most of the tracks, yet a couple of them just don't fit at all, and it really ruins the theme of the album. Set Me Free and Ankling Life are the two tracks I'm talking about here, and they just don't have any real Mello influence, which makes them stick out horribly in an album where most of the tracks have that same style to them. There's also some tracks here that just seem to be filler, which would be Down and Here We Go Again. They have that Joytime style to them, but they don't really do anything special, and they're just like extremely bland in comparison to the other tracks here. I feel like if the 4 tracks I mentioned were cut from the album, bringing the 13-song track list down to 9 tracks, I feel like Joytime III honestly would have been a better and more cohesive album. I think this is a solid 5 out of 10, step in the right direction from Joytime II, but still not as good as Joytime, even if some of the tracks here are better than the tracks there. But I would love to know how you feel about this album. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments. If there's any albums you'd like me to cover, leave those in the comments too. Thanks for watching. See ya.